By late afternoon, the chicken stew had already turned sour. By sundown, I swore I heard something breathing in our kitchen. Not the soft hiss of steam, not the creak of floorboards, but a slow rasp like lungs pressed beneath the weight of the house itself. That sound was the beginning of the unraveling, though none of us knew it yet. My name is Aria Collins, and I was 18 when the story I'm telling you unfolded in Cypress Bend, Louisiana. The bayou runs thick here, a place where the air clings to your skin like syrup and secrets hang heavier than the moss in the trees. My mother had died years earlier, long before I could even remember her face. My father, Jonah, was a carpenter who took jobs up and down the state. He was good with wood, steady with his hands, but his heart was restless. He remarried quickly, and that's how Evelyn became my stepmother. To the congregation at St. Lucia's Church, Evelyn was the very image of grace. She wore pressed Sunday dresses in shades of lavender and cream, baked pies for socials, and never missed a hymn. Her laughter rang like bells across the pews. But once the church doors closed and our neighbors went home, her voice sharpened like a blade. Behind our clapboard walls, her discipline wasn't measured in words, but in pinches. Small, deliberate bites of pain on my arms, ribs, or the soft skin just above the hip. They left no marks visible at school or at service, but they carved a map of bruised silence inside me. And then there was Piper. She was 17, just a year younger than me, Evelyn's pride and only child. Piper strutted through the house in bright dresses Evelyn bought from the boutique downtown, her hair always tied with satin ribbons. I wore second-hand skirts from the thrift shop, hemmed unevenly and smelling faintly of mothballs. Piper mocked me for it, flashing her manicured nails, swiping the better seat at the table, whispering lies in her mother's ear until I found myself scolded for things I hadn't done. From early on, I learned survival meant perfection. I scrubbed the kitchen floors until the wood gleamed. I pressed my father's shirts until the creases looked cut with a knife. I cooked gumbo thick with okra and sausage, cornbread golden and crisp on the edges. If I slipped, if I burned the roux or left lint on a shirt, Evelyn's nails would find me. Piper would laugh behind her hand. But the truth is, I had been carrying the weight of survival long before Evelyn ever set foot in our house. When I was a little girl, I nearly drowned in a ditch my father had dug near the bayou to trap catfish. I slipped in while chasing dragonflies, water filling my nose, my lungs. The memory comes back in flashes, light fractured above me, the taste of mud, my chest burning. I survived, though I never understood why, and in Evelyn's eyes, it was as if that accident had branded me, a life borrowed, a debt unpaid. That summer evening, I stood in the kitchen staring at the pot of chicken stew. It had turned sour, gray bubbles forming where none should have been. The smell was foul, clinging to my hair, and beneath it I swore I heard that breath again. I clamped the lid down, told myself it was the heat, nothing more. But outside on the porch, sparks leapt from the woodpile where my father stacked cut planks. The air was thick, unmoving, ready to ignite. An ember crackled, catching dry bark. The glow spread, hungry. And in the instant before the flames surged, I realized with horror, one girl was still inside the house. Before I continue, drop where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe if you've ever seen one night change a family forever. Because what happened that night on our porch fire changed everything I thought I knew about the woman who raised me, and about the price a life can carry. The flames moved faster than I thought fire could. 1 second, it was just a spark. a stubborn ember dancing at the edge of the woodpile. The next, dry planks and porch rails burst like kindling. Heat swelled against the glass, crackling, pushing smoke into every corner of the house. I remember coughing, stumbling down the hallway, Piper screaming for her mother. Evelyn wasn't beside us. She had vanished back inside, swallowed by the smoke. I thought she had left us, thought she had abandoned both of us to the blaze. But then, just as my knees buckled, her shadow cut through the haze. Evelyn clutched a small tin box to her chest, eyes watering from the smoke, and with her other hand she seized my arm. Her grip was iron. She dragged me through the choking air and shoved me out onto the porch steps. We landed hard on the dirt, both of us gasping, Piper clinging to my sleeve. Evelyn's hair was wild, her dress scorched at the hem. The neighbors rushed toward us with buckets of water, shouting, beating the flames back until at last the fire hissed into smoke. I lay there trembling, certain I'd felt death breathing down my neck again, like the bayou had opened its mouth once more. In the days that followed, something shifted. Evelyn stopped pinching, stopped scolding. The sharp slap of her nails against my ribs, the muttered insults about my thrift store skirts, they ended. But her eyes never softened. They watched me with an intensity I couldn't name, as if I were a puzzle she had almost finished, but not quite solved. I might have let it go, chalked it up to shock, if not for what I found. The tin box Evelyn clutched during the fire sat on her dresser for weeks afterward. She never let Piper touch it, and whenever my father asked, she said it held our insurance papers and family records. One morning, when she left it unlocked, curiosity won. I eased the lid open, fingers shaking. Inside lay birth certificates, a deed, brittle photographs of a family gathering long before my time. But tucked beneath those papers was something that made my stomach turn cold. A locket, old brass rubbed dull with age. I snapped it open, expecting another photograph. Instead, coiled inside was a lock of hair, dark chestnut strands tied with a faded ribbon. I had seen a picture once of my mother, the real one, before sickness hollowed her out. She'd worn her hair long, the same shade of chestnut I carried on my head every morning in the mirror. That locket was hers, and Evelyn had carried it into the fire like it was worth more than flesh and bone. I held it in my palm, the ribbon trembling with my breath. Why would she save this? Why not save Piper, or me first? The question throbbed in my chest louder than the cicadas outside. That night, Piper leaned across our shared bedroom, eyes glinting in the dark. Her voice was a whisper sharp enough to cut. She didn't save papers, Piper said. She made a deal. It didn't take long for Piper to find her way back into trouble. While Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on me with that strange, unreadable calm, Piper slipped into the back rooms of bars downtown. Cypress Bend had more than one place where the lights stayed dim and the dice rolled louder than the jukebox. She was only 17, but Piper carried herself like she owned every smoky table she touched. I heard the whispers first, from the women at church socials, from neighbors leaning on their porches. They said Piper was running tabs she couldn't pay, that she was borrowing from men twice her age. When word reached my father, Jonah's face hardened in a way I hadn't seen since Mother's funeral. He cornered Piper one evening, his carpenter's hands gripping the back of a chair so tight the wood creaked. "You think this family is made of money?" he shouted, voice echoing through the house. "Cards, dice, bets, do you want to bury us in debt?" Piper rolled her eyes, lips curled in a smirk, and walked out as if the lecture were nothing more than wind through the shutters. That night, Evelyn collapsed. No warning, no stumble. One moment she was folding laundry, the next her body hit the floor with a sound that cracked through the boards. Half her face slackened, her right arm limp. I screamed for my father, and together we rushed her to the small hospital on the edge of town. The doctors ran test after test. Scans, blood work, questions about her health. Every chart came back normal. "We don't understand," they told us. "There's no stroke, no clot, nothing visible, yet her body refuses to move." They kept her for 3 days, baffled, before sending her home with a shrug and prescriptions that promised nothing. On the second night, while I dozed in the stiff hospital chair beside her bed, a nurse touched my shoulder. Her eyes were wide, her voice low. "I don't want to frighten you, but there's something strange," she whispered. "The sheets. Look." She pulled the corner of the linen back. Damp stains spread across the mattress, dark and murky. My first thought was water from a spill, but when I leaned closer, the smell hit me. Muddy, sulfurous, the scent of the bayou after a storm. "Maybe the roof leaked," I offered, though the ceiling above was spotless. The nurse shook her head. "It's been clear skies all week, and it only happens when she sleeps." The image burned in me long after we carried Evelyn back home, her half-paralyzed body supported between my father and me. That night, as the cicadas shrieked and the house creaked, I couldn't shake the smell of mud. I woke to the sound of dripping, slow, deliberate, like something thick sliding across wood. My bare feet touched the floorboards, and the chill made me gasp. A trail of wet prints stretched across the room, too large to be mine, too shapeless to be shoes. They glistened faintly in the dim light, each one sinking deeper into the grain of the wood. I followed the trail, my heart rattling against my ribs. The footprints led straight to a folded sheet of paper lying in the hall. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a bulletin from St. Lucia's, dated just days before. Across the top, written in looping script, were the words, "Novena for substitution." The night I found the church bulletin, I couldn't sleep. Those words, "Novena for substitution," echoed through me like a drum. A novena was prayer, yes, but the kind that demanded devotion, repetition, sacrifice, and substitution. The word tasted bitter. It meant one life could stand in for another. I lay awake listening to Evelyn's uneven breathing in the next room, my father's exhausted snores, Piper humming to herself in front of the mirror as she painted her lips scarlet for no one but her own reflection. Something inside me snapped. If darkness was circling our family, then someone had to meet it with light. At dawn, I walked to St. Lucia's and knelt before the crucifix. The church was cool, shadowed, smelling faintly of wax and wood polish. My knees ached against the stone, but I pressed my palms together and whispered, "Lord, if danger has been called to our house, don't let it take my father. Don't let it take her either. If it costs me, then let me carry it." I promised a pilgrimage, 7 miles along the parish road, 3 steps forward, 1 step to my knees. 3 steps, kneel, 3 steps, kneel, from our home by the bayou all the way to St. Lucia's on the next full moon. The day arrived blistering hot, the Louisiana sun pouring down like molten brass. Neighbors watched from their porches as I moved down the road. 3 steps, kneel. The gravel cut my skin. My jeans tore. Sweat burned my eyes. Some shouted I was crazy. Others whispered prayers with me. By the time I reached the church, my legs shook so hard I thought they'd give out. But I pressed my forehead to the steps and whispered the vow again. And something shifted. When I came home, Evelyn's voice was softer. She no longer barked orders or muttered sharp words. She still watched me, but now with something almost human in her gaze, something that looked like gratitude and fear tangled together. Within weeks, she regained some strength, her hand steadier on a glass, her words clearer. For a brief moment, the house almost felt normal. My father Jonah smiled more. Humming while he worked in his shop, neighbors brought casseroles, saying how blessed we were that Evelyn had pulled through. I wanted to believe the nightmare was fading, but Piper was Piper. No vow could scrub that rot away. Evelyn arranged a marriage for her with a man from Baton Rouge, someone respectable with money and family land. The wedding was all lace and magnolias, Evelyn beaming in pearls as though she were the bride herself. Piper smirked at me across the pew, as if the victory were hers. It lasted 11 weeks. Exactly 11. Then Piper was delivered back to our doorstep, her new husband sending word she had gambled away her dowry and cursed him when he confronted her. Evelyn's face was stone, Jonah silent with shame. Piper only shrugged, kicking off her heels like she'd returned from a holiday. That night, as the cicadas whined and the air grew thick, Piper slipped into Evelyn's room. I watched from the hallway, unseen. She reached into her purse and drew out a small cloth bag, tied with twine. A grisgris, the kind root workers made down by the river. Some for love, some for luck, some for things darker still. Piper pressed it into Evelyn's coat pocket. "It's a charm for peace," she whispered, her smile thin as a blade. The house began to turn against us. At first it was small things, easy to dismiss. A pot of gumbo I had simmered all morning, okra tender, sausage rich, the whole kitchen filled with its warmth, had soured by midday. I lifted the lid and gagged at the stench, as if the swamp itself had crept into the pot. I told myself it was the heat, though no other family on the street complained of their food rotting so quickly. Then it was the cornbread. Evelyn pulled it fresh from the oven, golden and crisp on the edges, steam rising as we sliced it. By dusk, green mold crept across the top like moss spreading on stone. By dawn, the entire loaf had collapsed into a soft, rancid mess. Day after day, the same thing. Meat spoiled in the fridge within hours. Milk soured before the cap was even unscrewed. Our meals turned foul as the sun went down. The smell clung to the curtains, seeped into my clothes, made me ashamed to open our door to neighbors. And then the sickness took me. It came without warning. A fever climbed my body in minutes, setting my skin on fire. My chest tightened, every breath a labor. Sweat soaked my pillow while chills rattled my bones. I lay trembling, hearing my father pacing the floor, hearing Piper mutter that maybe this was me getting what was coming. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw Evelyn watching. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. At some point, while my father fetched water, she leaned close. I felt her hand slide beneath the blanket, felt the weight of something soft slip into the pocket of my hoodie. Her hand lingered there for a heartbeat, as if she were planting more than cloth. By morning, the fever was gone. My chest was clear, my body strong enough to stand. My father called it a miracle. Piper called it luck. But I knew better when I found the grease tucked into my pocket. The same cloth bag Piper had once pressed into Evelyn's hands, now carried by me. That Sunday I went to Reverend Harlan, the pastor who had baptized me when I was a child. I told him about the spoiled food, about the fever, about the charm passed from hand to hand. His face drained of color. "Child," he said, voice hushed, That's not protection. That's a marker. Whoever carries it, that's the one death will claim when the reckoning comes. You weren't healed. You were traded. His words hollowed me out. A stand-in, a substitute. Just like the bulletin I had found weeks earlier. Evelyn hadn't saved me out of love. She had shifted the curse onto me. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't breathe. The house groaned like it was alive, and I wandered toward the pantry, drawn by a cold draft. The smell of rot was worse there. I pulled the door open and froze. Along the wooden wall, faint but deliberate, were claw marks. Not from rats or raccoons. These were human scratches, gouged deep, grouped in fives like someone had been keeping count. Beside them, etched sharper, were numbers, dates, each mark moving closer to the present, as if someone, or something, was counting down. I reached out, fingers trembling over the last etched line. The date was only days away, and behind me, in the darkness of the kitchen, I heard breathing again. Slow, patient, waiting. I couldn't stop thinking about the tally marks carved into the pantry wall. Each scratch felt like a heartbeat stolen, each number a drumbeat pulling me closer to an ending I couldn't see. I knew the church alone wouldn't give me answers. This was older than prayer, older than hymns. It belonged to the bayou and the shadows that lived in its reeds. So I went to see Miss Delphine. Folks in Cypress Bend called her a root worker. She lived in a shotgun house raised on stilts above the marsh, bottles of colored glass hanging in the windows, herbs drying from the rafters. Some swore she cured sickness when doctors failed. Others whispered she cursed men who betrayed their wives. She looked at me without surprise, as though she had been waiting. Her eyes were milky, clouded, yet sharp in a way that pierced right through me. "You brought something in," she said before I spoke. "And it's not leaving on its own." I told her everything. About Evelyn's collapse, the gris-gris, the spoiled food, the fever that broke only when the charm was slipped into my pocket. About the tally marks. About the bulletin with its single phrase. Novena for substitution. Delphine lit a candle, its flame sputtering blue. "This work," she said, "chooses one bearer, only one. If it's pushed onto another, the curse doesn't vanish, it rebounds, harder, meaner, like a river snapping back its current." She leaned closer, her voice dropping low. "If someone took it from you, child, they took the beating stick into their own ribs. But know this, when the bayou decides on a life, it won't stop until it's paid." Her words rattled in me all the way home. The air smelled of smoke, though no fire burned. The porch boards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. That night, Evelyn called me into her room. She was thinner now, her skin stretched, her face pale beneath the lamplight. But her eyes, they were steady. "I put the charm back on myself," she said, her voice ragged but clear. "I couldn't let it eat you." I stared, my throat dry. "Why?" Her hands twisted the bedsheet, knuckles bone white. "Because I owed you, for the years I pinched, for the words I carved into you sharper than nails, for dragging you from that fire when maybe I should have dragged Piper instead. I owed you a life, so I gave mine." For a moment, the house felt still, almost merciful. But then the door slammed open. Piper staggered in, her hair wild, perfume sour with sweat and liquor. She carried a leather-bound book, its pages crumpled, stained with grease. She dropped it onto the table, pages spilling open. "Look," she said, her voice shrill. "They want their money, all of it." I glanced down. Columns of debts, bets lost in smoky bars, names of men I'd never met. And there, my name, written in bold ink, circled twice. Aria Collins. Collateral. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Piper laughed, brittle and cruel. Told them you'd cover me, told them you'd pay, because you're the good one, aren't you? The one who takes it all. Evelyn gasped, clutching her chest. I stood frozen, staring at the inked letters of my own name, knowing the tally in the pantry was still counting down. The curse grew inside Evelyn like a storm no doctor could chart. Her belly swelled as if she were 7 months with child, though we all knew that was impossible. Her eyes clouded, the whites turning the color of smoke. She could barely see me when I brought her water, yet she clutched my hand with startling strength, as if to tether herself to the living. I could no longer pretend the house was just unlucky. Something deliberate beat against its walls. Piper drifted in and out like a shadow, her debts following close behind. She sneered at Evelyn's groans, rolled her eyes at my care. "You two are pathetic," she hissed one night. "Always clinging to each other like barnacles," I snapped. Standing in the kitchen, I told them both what the rules were now. This house will not feed idlers. If you stay, you work. Feed the chickens. Weed the garden. Fix what's broken. If you won't, the door is open. My voice trembled, but I held steady. My father was gone more often now, trying to keep jobs steady, so it was left to me to keep the roof from caving in. Piper laughed, the sound sharp as glass. "Listen to you, little preacher. Think you're the head of the house now? You'll die just like her. Maybe sooner." But something in my chest hardened. I wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe because I knew fear was already eating Evelyn alive. A week later, while cleaning out the trunk in the shed, I found papers, yellowed insurance forms, signed years ago. The payout was small, hardly enough to cover the loss of a porch, but scrawled across the margin in Piper's unmistakable handwriting were calculations, dates, and clipped to the corner, a matchbook from the tavern where she gambled. My stomach turned. The fire that nearly swallowed me years ago hadn't been an accident. Piper had lit it, hoping the insurance money would give her a quick escape from the life she despised. Evelyn had carried me out of that blaze, but Piper had sparked it in the first place. I confronted her that night. She didn't even flinch. "So what if I did?" she spat. "You should thank me. Without that fire, you'd still be invisible. It made you important." I wanted to strike her, to scream, but Evelyn's coughing drew me back inside. She lay propped against pillows, her face drawn, her breaths shallow. The tally marks carved in the pantry wall throbbed in my memory, each one pulling us closer. The door creaked. Piper stepped across the threshold, slow, deliberate. Her eyes glittered in the lamplight as she leaned forward, lips curling. "Mom," she said. The word dragged out like a curse. Evelyn's body jerked. Blood burst from her mouth in a sudden gush, dark and violent, spilling down her chin and onto the sheets. Her eyes rolled white. The room erupted in chaos. My screams, Evelyn's choking gasps. Piper's twisted smile. And in that moment, I knew the tally had reached its end. Evelyn died the way storms break, sudden, violent, leaving wreckage in their wake. Blood poured from her mouth, her body convulsing until every breath rattled out of her chest. I held her hand, sticky with sweat, whispering words I didn't believe she could hear. Jonah knelt at her side, face buried in her shoulder, sobbing like a man who had finally realized he could not build his way out of ruin. Piper stood frozen, eyes wide, her lips parted in shock. For once there was no smirk, and then it was over. Evelyn's eyes stared glassy at the ceiling, her swollen belly sinking, her lips parted as if she still wanted to speak. The house was silent, save for the cicadas shrieking outside. The days that followed blurred. Neighbors came with covered dishes, casseroles no one touched. They whispered about curses, about debts unpaid, about how Evelyn had looked before the sickness hollowed her out. Some pitied us. Some pitied themselves for living so close to a house marked by ruin. Jonah couldn't bear it. He packed his tools into his truck and left before dawn one morning, saying only that he needed to find work farther down the river. He kissed my forehead, but wouldn't meet my eyes. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, the sound of gravel crunching under his tires fading until there was nothing but the bayou's hum. He never came back. Piper unraveled in public. She drifted into town, hair wild, shoes scuffed, muttering about debts and voices in the walls. She stood outside bars, cursing strangers, screaming at lights that weren't there. Some nights she laughed, spinning in circles on Main Street until she collapsed in the dirt. Other nights she cried, begging Evelyn's ghost to forgive her. Folks stopped trying to help. They crossed the street, locked their doors, whispered that madness had claimed her as surely as the curse had claimed Evelyn. Eventually, Piper vanished altogether. Some said she wandered north. Others swore they saw her sleeping under the bridge, eyes vacant. I never went to find her. And me? I stayed. The house felt emptier than ever, but I scrubbed it clean. I tended the chickens, weeded the garden, stitched torn clothes until the fabric was stronger than before. I thought often of Evelyn's final words, of her confession that she had carried the burden to spare me. Love twisted into sacrifice, cruelty turning, at last, into grace. One evening, months later, I walked past St. Lucia's after evening mass. The sky was purple with dusk, candles flickering inside the chapel. At the gate I saw a bundle, a baby swaddled in a thin blanket left on the church steps as if the world had already abandoned it. I lifted the child into my arms, its cries soft against my chest, and something inside me broke open. I brought the baby home. I named her Hope. She became my reason to keep the lights burning, to cook meals even if they spoiled, to keep breathing when silence pressed too heavy. I raised her as my own, swearing she would never feel the pinch of cruelty or the weight of someone else's bargain. She would grow with love, not with tally marks carved in secret. And now I ask you, the ones listening to my story, when love pays a debt it never owed, is that punishment or is it grace? What would you do with the life left in your hands?